I'm on a mission to reach my first 1,000 subscribers, and I need your support. If you love movies, reviews, and great stories, hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey. Thank you.
In an abandoned factory, silent and desolate, a group of men hurriedly moved cargo with anxious expressions. No one would have guessed that the seemingly ordinary crates of watermelons concealed a horrifying secret. Suddenly, a team of heavily armed soldiers stormed into the factory. Team 1, in position, ready to engage. A voice crackled through their comms. The deafening sound of gunfire echoed through the empty space, immediately drawing the attention of a worker carrying a crate. But before he could react, the factory manager brushed it off. Don't overthink it, just load the cargo, he ordered, urging the worker to keep moving. Despite the relentless gunfire, no one seemed too alarmed except for the manager, whose unease grew with every passing second. Then, without warning, all the lights in the factory cut out, plunging the space into darkness. In the pitch black, the armed soldiers seized a worker, shoving a phone screen in his face. "Where is this man?" one of them demanded. The terrified worker, clearly clueless, insisted he had never seen the person in the photo. But his denial didn't save him. Without hesitation, the soldiers executed him as if he were nothing more than livestock. Then, without remorse, they looted everything of value from the trucks before setting the factory ablaze. Who were these men? What gave them the audacity to massacre an entire factory crew? And more importantly, what were they looking for? This story began a few days earlier. That morning, Andy woke up looking exhausted, a far cry from the elite soldier he once was. Years ago, he had led his team to numerous victories on the battlefield. But now, he was a shell of his former self. Not long after, Andy arrived at work, carrying out his usual duties with an absent-minded demeanor. It wasn't long before his manager called him into the office. The man was clearly trying to suppress his anger. Apparently, the mother of a recently fired employee had filed a complaint, accusing Andy of verbally abusing her son. With no other option, Andy explained his side of the story. The guy was lazy, never completed his tasks, and even used drugs while on shift. Andy had had enough and fired him on the spot. The manager, however, didn't think that justified Andy's harsh words. "This is your last warning. If you pull something like this again, you're out," he said firmly. Andy was seething with rage but knew he couldn't argue. After work, he met with his therapist. The years of war had left him with severe PTSD and recurring memory loss. Despite undergoing treatment for a long time, his condition hadn't improved. The therapist suggested reconnecting with old comrades to process his past. Andy stayed silent, but his mind drifted to that fateful day on the battlefield. The day his team was ambushed due to his poor decision-making. One by one, his comrades fell in a hail of gunfire. Since then, his soul had been hollow, his life in shambles. Even his family had suffered. His daughter, Rachel, grew up without a father's love, becoming rebellious and reckless. Rachel had fallen in with a dangerous crowd, dating a thug named C. He was involved in shady business and was addicted to drugs. He frequently dragged Rachel along to wild parties. That night, C told Rachel he had to leave town for a while because of work. She was frustrated, but to make it up to her, he took her to a party. Before the night was over, C received a phone call and had to leave. He asked his friends to look after Rachel. No one expected what happened next. Rachel was coerced into trying a lethal substance. She died from an overdose. When Andy got the news, he was shattered. His daughter was gone, and all he could do was stand like a lifeless corpse at her funeral. The whispers around him were unbearable. Some mourned Rachel, others blamed him a useless father who failed to protect his child. At home, his wife tried to comfort him, but nothing could fill the void. Later, as he entered Rachel's room to pack up her belongings, her phone screen suddenly lit up with an unread message. It was from C. "Why haven't you been answering?" the message read. Then, another message followed. A shared location. "I'll be back soon." Andy stared at the screen, processing the information. C clearly didn't know Rachel was dead. A storm of emotions raged within him. After a moment of silent deliberation, Andy washed his face, grabbed a nail gun, and slipped out into the night. He had made up his mind. Meanwhile, C returned to the party house, expecting to see Rachel. Instead, his friends delivered the devastating news. Rachel was gone. C refused to believe it at first, but reality sank in quickly. Rage took over. He turned on the so-called friend who had given Rachel the drugs, beating him mercilessly before storming off into the night. As fate would have it, he unknowingly brushed past Andy in the street. They didn't recognize each other. Not yet. Andy, gripping the nail gun tightly, lurked in the shadows. He approached one of C's lookouts from behind and pulled the trigger. The man dropped instantly. Then, without hesitation, Andy pounded on the door. A thug opened it, only to be met with a nail to the skull. With just a nail gun in hand, Andy tore through the gang like a vengeful specter. But then a gunshot rang out. Andy staggered as a man tackled him out the door. Though he had been out of the battlefield for years, his instincts remained sharp. He quickly found an opening and strangled his attacker until the man went limp. Breathing heavily, Andy retrieved the thug's firearm and pressed forward. he found himself deep inside the hideout, where C's crew was holed up. Without hesitation, he shot one of them dead and turned his fury on the other. "Where's C?" Andy roared. He had seen this man's name on Rachel's phone. He was certain this was the guy who supplied the drugs. Andy was determined C had to pay. But just as he pressed for answers, another thug crept up behind him, a plastic bag in hand, ready to suffocate him. During the struggle, the gun fell to the ground. The gang leader smirked, standing up, ready to finish Andy off. A gunshot rang out, but it wasn't Andy who collapsed. The plastic bag suffocating him was suddenly yanked away, revealing a familiar face. It was Jack, his old comrade. Before making his move, Andy had reached out to Jack for backup. Seeing his old friend consumed by pain and despair, Jack attempted to lighten the mood. "You really had me running all over the place just to clean up your mess." "Huh?" he joked. Andy remained silent. Jack quickly dropped the humor, his tone turning serious. "You can't keep destroying yourself like this, man. It won't solve anything." As their car left the main road and entered a narrow village path, Andy's thoughts began to shift. Back home, he washed his wounds, and for the first time, he couldn't hold back his tears. Could he really just accept this reality, watch his daughter's killer walk free? The answer was clear, no. Determined, Andy burned his blood-stained clothes and called his wife, asking for the password to their daughter's phone. As he searched for more clues, he realized something. The previous night, he had crossed paths with the man responsible for Rachel's death. The fire of vengeance ignited within him. Now that he had seen his enemy's face, there was no way he could let him go. Meanwhile, across town, C was also drowning in grief over Rachel, but he soon found himself targeted by 3 thugs. With no patience to deal with them, he pretended to be afraid and left the diner. However, his anger festered, and when he saw them following him outside, he decided to fight back. Before he could strike, blinding headlights flooded the alleyway. A short-haired woman stepped out, gun in hand, signaling for C to get in the car. The thugs didn't dare move under her aim. As the car rolled into the darkness, an intense argument erupted inside. The woman, Hannah, was C's business associate. She expressed her condolences over Rachel's death but then dropped a bombshell. Rachel hadn't died from an overdose. The batch she took had been tampered with before hitting the market. She wasn't the only victim. Others had died the same way. C was stunned. The drugs had come from his father's supply. What the hell was going on? Meanwhile, Andy arrived at a private club to meet his old comrades. They reminisced about their fallen brothers. The memories too painful to suppress. They lifted their glasses in silence, honoring the dead. But something about that fateful mission still didn't sit right. Too many inconsistencies, too many unanswered questions. Andy then told them about Rachel's death. Though the coroner ruled it an overdose, he suspected foul play. This was bigger than just one bad batch. This reeked of organized crime. He vowed to root out the truth, no matter the cost. And to his surprise, his old squad backed him without hesitation. They had all suffered too much loss already. If this was a fight Andy wanted, they were in. With their help, Andy launched his investigation. He tracked down an arms dealer in a hotel basement, purchasing a high-caliber firearm at an exorbitant price. But the moment the dealer saw Andy's face, he became agitated. "If you keep digging, Karen won't let you off easy." The name piqued Andy's interest. Karen, could this be the mastermind behind it all? He didn't have time to ponder. As Andy turned to leave, the dealer discreetly grabbed his phone, but before he could make the call, Andy spun around and shot him in the leg. With a blade pressed to his throat, Andy demanded Karen's location. Before the dealer could talk, a gunman dressed in black appeared behind Andy. Luckily, Mickey, one of Andy's old teammates, arrived just in time. Realizing the dealer wouldn't spill, Andy left him bleeding on the floor and followed the next lead toward Karen. To continue the investigation elsewhere, Hannah pulled the car over, intending to grab a few supplies from a convenience store. However, C felt uneasy. Sure enough, the moment Hannah stepped inside, a masked man followed her, gun in hand. Gunfire erupted inside. C sprang into action, rushing in to help. He managed to get Hannah back to the car, but before he could react, a bag was thrown over his head. When C finally saw light again, he realized he had been taken to a desolate area. His captor? None other than Karen, his father's former subordinate. Karen, filled with rage, spat insults at them. It turned out Hannah had always been working for C's father, infiltrating Karen's ranks to sabotage his operations. Meanwhile, C's father had used the chaos to eliminate Karen's influence, leaving him in ruins. Now, Karen wanted revenge. Just as the situation reached a boiling point, gunshots rang out from behind. Chaos erupted. C took the opportunity to crawl under a nearby vehicle as bullets tore through the air. Hannah was hit, her life hanging by a thread. The attackers dropped one by one, and C, terrified, jumped into a white truck and sped off. By the time Andy arrived, C had already vanished. However, his escape was short-lived. His truck ran out of gas, stranding him on an empty road. Frustrated and scared, he had no idea who to call for help. Meanwhile, Andy and his team were securing the battlefield when Jack noticed Hannah was still breathing. as she weakly whispered C's name. Andy, blinded by rage, pulled his gun on her, ready to end it. Jack, stunned, intervened. This isn't you, Andy, you don't even know the whole story. Realizing Hannah still had vital information, Jack quickly treated her wounds. With her last bit of strength, she gave them an address, an abandoned factory on the other side of town where C's father was operating. At the factory, C confronted his father, demanding to know the truth behind Rachel's death. To his shock, his father admitted nothing, but deep down, C knew the tainted batch of drugs that killed Rachel had come from his father's own supply. This was all part of a plan. His father had orchestrated Rachel's death, believing she was a distraction that had kept C from focusing on the family business. C was paralyzed. His own father had plotted to kill the woman he loved for the sake of the empire. Stay here, his father ordered. Trouble is coming. Elsewhere, Andy and his squad arrived at the factory. They stealthily infiltrated the compound, only to find it empty. They had been misled. Hannah, even in her dying breath, had tried to protect C as flames engulfed the factory. Andy felt an unsettling sense of unease. The next morning, Andy awoke to a frantic phone call from his wife. Her voice trembled with fear. Andy, come home please, they're here. Gunshots echoed through the receiver before the call was cut off. Heart pounding, Andy grabbed his weapon, staying low to the ground. Just then, Mickey arrived in time to extract him. The two retreated to regroup with the others at a safe house. They knew exactly what was happening. C's father had started his retaliation. This wasn't over. With the enemy closing in, Andy and his team grabbed their weapons and made a run for it. Their pursuers weren't far behind. As the distance closed, Andy made a split-second decision, pulling the car onto a narrow, overgrown path. They abandoned the vehicle, taking cover beneath it for an ambush. Gunfire erupted once more, working together seamlessly as they had in the past. Andy's squad eliminated their attackers and fled. But the chase was relentless. Just when they thought they had a moment to breathe, a black-clad gunman opened fire on their vehicle. With nowhere to run, Andy's team engaged in a fierce shootout, retreating into a nearby building for cover. The final battle was at hand. Their skills hadn't dulled. They took down their enemies one by one, eventually capturing a man with inside knowledge. News of this reached C's father, who immediately sent men to extract his son. But just as the extraction began, Andy emerged from the shadows, gun raised, stepping right in front of C's father. The older man didn't seem surprised. He even seemed to know exactly who Andy was. But Andy had no interest in pleasantries. Upon hearing that his wife had been murdered, Andy snapped. Without hesitation, he pulled the trigger, ending the man's life. Hearing the gunshot, C instinctively knew what had happened. Sitting in the getaway car, he froze. Rage, grief, and fear twisted inside him. Then he saw Andy step out of the shadows. Heart pounding, C grabbed a gun and ran after him. Andy's revenge was complete, but as he walked away, surrounded by his brothers in arms, he felt no peace. The war inside him was far from over. Perhaps he had grown weary of the bloodshed, or maybe it was the loss of the two most important people in his life that had drained him of his will to live. Andy was consumed by pain and regret, and no amount of comfort from his comrades could pull him out of it. Just then, C arrived, fueled by vengeance. As Andy watched his teammates fall before him, he was reminded of the battlefield years ago. The dark muzzle of a gun pointed at him. But this time, he didn't resist. The film ends here. This is an action film created by a former Royal Marine, who also stars in the lead role. Through the story of a veteran seeking revenge for his daughter, the film delves deep into war trauma, mental health, and the cost of vengeance. With raw emotional depth and a compelling narrative, the movie quickly gained widespread attention. The film follows Andy Coleman, a former soldier who embarks on a quest for revenge after his daughter dies from a drug overdose. Reuniting with his old comrades, Andy hunts down the criminal organization responsible for her death. Throughout his journey, he not only battles external enemies but also faces his own psychological scars and moral dilemmas. Through intense action sequences and intricate psychological portrayals, the film explores the lasting effects of war on the human mind. It highlights the struggles of veterans with PTSD, showing how the horrors of war continue to haunt them long after they've left the battlefield. Andy and his fellow soldiers, once subjected to extreme wartime stress, find their past traumas resurfacing in civilian life. The film vividly illustrates the post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, that many veterans endure. Andy's pursuit of revenge serves as a lens through which the long-term impact of war on mental health is revealed. The story also critiques society's indifference toward the psychological struggles of veterans. While revenge is a central theme, the director doesn't present it in a simplistic way. As Andy seeks justice, he gradually realizes that violence does not bring true closure, it only deepens his pain. Through his interactions with his comrades, the film explores the cost of vengeance and the moral complexity of such choices. More than just an individual's trauma, the film reflects on human nature through violence and sacrifice in the context of war. Andy's revenge mission ultimately becomes a journey of self-discovery, exposing the profound emotional impact of war on the human soul. Andy is the heart of the film, and his psychological evolution drives the narrative, from his initial rage and despair to his eventual realization of the futility of revenge. Andy's character arc is deeply nuanced. The lead actor delivers a gripping performance, capturing the internal struggle and growth of the character with remarkable depth. Andy's comrades are not just his supporters, they are also bearers of wartime memories. Their presence enriches the film's emotional layers, illustrating the collective trauma inflicted by war on an entire unit. Visually, the film employs a cold-toned color palette, emphasizing the brutality of war and the loneliness within its characters. The set design authentically recreates battlefields and urban environments, enhancing the film's realism. The action sequences aren't just visually striking but carry symbolic weight, underscoring the themes of trauma and redemption. The soundtrack predominantly features somber string compositions, heightening the tension and oppressive atmosphere. The synergy between music and visuals amplifies the film's emotional intensity. Sunray Fallon Sower is not just an action movie, it is a profound meditation on war trauma and mental health. Through its raw storytelling and psychological depth, the film urges society to pay greater attention to veterans' mental well-being. It also delivers a powerful lesson on humanity and ethics. With its gripping emotional execution and thought-provoking themes, this film has become one of the most significant cinematic works of 2025. It not only showcases the horrors of war but also delves into the complexity of human emotions through individual stories. For those who appreciate both action and psychological dramas, this is a must-watch. For viewers interested in exploring these powerful themes, be sure to watch Sunray Fallon Sower. Today's story comes to an end, but the journey of exploring great movies continues. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any exciting upcoming videos. Also, leave a comment sharing your thoughts on the movie. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to create even more quality content. See you in the next video.